The shouting started before the boat even touched the pier. "Turn that thing around. You don't belong here," a young Coast Guard officer barked, his voice dripping with disrespect. All eyes turned toward the old wooden vessel easing its way into the harbor. Its paint was faded, its engine coughed and groaned, and standing at the helm was a man who looked even older than the boat itself. His beard was streaked with gray, his uniform was worn, and his silence only seemed to annoy the guards more. "Ignore me, old man," the officer snapped. "This harbor isn't for relics like you. Show your papers before I drag you off myself." The crew on the docks chuckled, some shaking their heads at the sight. To them, it was just another stubborn fisherman daring to cross military lines. But the man at the helm didn't shout back. He didn't beg. He simply stood tall, his eyes steady, as if he'd heard this kind of insult 1,000 times before. "Do you know who you're talking to?" he finally asked, his voice calm but heavy with meaning. The guards laughed again. "Oh really? And who are you supposed to be? Some forgotten sailor from the last war?" The old captain leaned forward, his voice cut through the jeers like steel. "My name," he said slowly, "is Captain Elias Ward." The moment the name left his lips, the laughter died. The same men who mocked him just seconds ago froze in shock, their faces drained of color, their boots shuffled backward, because they finally realized the man they tried to humiliate wasn't just a stranger. He was a legend. For years his name had echoed across oceans, carried in the stories of sailors and whispered in the halls of naval academies. Captain Elias Ward. To some, he was a ghost from another era. To others, he was the man who had once commanded respect not just from his crew, but from entire nations. Yet on that dock, facing a line of young Coast Guard officers, he looked like nothing more than a tired old man standing in a worn jacket with weathered hands gripping the wheel of a battered boat. That was the tragedy of time heroes faded in the eyes of those who had never witnessed their fire. The guards didn't know, how could they? To them, he was just another civilian challenging their authority. They had never seen the storm he once sailed through or the men he had saved when hope was gone. They had never watched him hold the line when every other ship turned back. But those who remembered would never forget. Elias Ward had disappeared from the public eye decades ago. After retiring quietly, he vanished from newspapers, ceremonies, and parades. He chose the sea, living a life far from recognition, content with silence. That silence, however, created mystery. Who was he now? Where had he been all these years? And why had he returned today, steering his old vessel toward a guarded harbor that didn't want him? The Coast Guard officers didn't ask those questions. They didn't care about his past. All they saw was a violation, a man breaking rules, and they treated him like anyone else who dared to cross the line. But the air shifted the moment he spoke his name. The atmosphere on the dock was no longer casual. It was heavy, charged with an unspoken weight. Some of the older dock workers looked up suddenly, eyes wide, jaws tight. A few even murmured the name under their breath, as if they were remembering something sacred. Captain Elias Ward, the man who had once commanded fleets, the man who had pulled his crew from burning waters, the man who had been honored by generals and presidents alike. And now, here he was being barked at like a nobody. The young officers, embarrassed and unsure, hesitated. Their arrogance wavered, though pride kept their voices sharp. But deep inside, every single one of them felt the same unease. They hadn't just stopped another boat, they had stopped the wrong man. Asterisk. The dock had gone quiet after the name left his lips, but silence did not mean peace. It was the kind of silence heavy with tension, where every breath seemed too loud, every movement too sharp. Elias Ward stood tall on his boat, the waves rocking gently beneath him as if even the sea bowed in recognition. The young Coast Guard officers, however, struggled to hold their authority. They were trained to handle smugglers, trespassers, and reckless sailors, but not legends come back from history. One officer tried to laugh it off, though the sound was thin and nervous. "Names don't give you privilege," he said, forcing his voice louder than it wanted to be. "This is a restricted harbor. If you don't explain yourself, we'll have no choice but to remove you." Elias didn't answer right away. He scanned the dock, his eyes passing over the crowd that had gathered. Most of them were strangers, but among the faces, he recognized something familiar. Awed stares from the older men, whispers of recognition spreading like fire. He saw trembling hands covering mouths, heads shaking in disbelief, and even a few tears. These were not people looking at an outlaw. These were people who remembered what his name once meant, but the guards didn't want to lose face. They stepped forward again, trying to project authority. "Tell us your business," one demanded. "Why have you come here?" The captain's hands rested calmly on the wooden wheel of his boat. His voice, when it came, was steady and low, as if each word carried the weight of years. "I've come," he said, "because the sea still holds what it owes me." The crowd leaned in, the guards frowned, confused, but Elias did not elaborate. He had never been a man to waste words. Whispers rippled along the dock. Some of the older veterans spoke his name again, telling stories the younger men had never heard. "Ward," one murmured, "the storm rider, the man who turned back for the lost fleet. You boys don't know who you're dealing with." The young officers stiffened. Pride made them resist the pull of those stories, but doubt was creeping into their eyes. Their training had never prepared them for this moment, for facing someone whose very presence could divide a crowd, shifting loyalty in an instant. Elias, meanwhile, stared past them, his eyes fixed on the horizon as though he could still see shadows of battles long past. Memories rose unbidden. He remembered the storm that nearly tore apart his first command, the fear in the eyes of men too young to be facing death. He remembered standing at the helm, refusing to abandon them, guiding the ship through walls of water until dawn broke, and hope returned. He remembered the rescue under fire, when orders said to retreat but conscience said to return. He had defied his superiors that night, turning his ship back toward burning wreckage, pulling out sailors who would otherwise have been left for dead. He had faced court-martial for it, but history had turned the verdict into honor. He also remembered the day he could not save his friend. Another captain, braver than most, had been lost when a mission went wrong. Elias had pulled out survivors, but not him. That single failure had weighed on his heart heavier than every medal he had ever been given. That was why he had left the spotlight, why he had chosen silence. To live not as a hero, but as a man at peace with his ghosts. Now those ghosts had pulled him back here. The young Coast Guard officer, still clinging to his pride, pointed a finger at him. "Whatever your past, it doesn't change the fact that you are trespassing today. You will give us your identification and state your reason for entering this harbor, or you will be detained." The crowd stirred at the word detained. It sounded wrong when applied to Elias Ward. Men who had once served beneath him clenched their fists, muttering under their breath. A fisherman shouted, "You'd better watch your tongue, boy." Others nodded in agreement, emboldened by the captain's presence. Elias raised a hand gently, quieting them. "Let them speak," he said. "They're only doing what they were taught. They don't yet understand that history has deeper lessons than rules can offer." The young officer's cheeks flushed with anger. "Don't patronize me. We're not children." But Elias only gave a small smile, one that carried both sadness and pride. "You are, compared to the sea. The sea makes children of us all, and it never stops teaching." The words hung in the air, too heavy to dismiss. By now, the crowd was swelling, the story spreading like a current, pulling everyone toward the dock. Older sailors came forward, pointing at Elias with awe. "That man saved my cousin when his ship went down," one cried. "My father told me about him, said he was the only captain who never left a man behind." Every new voice chipped away at the wall of arrogance around the guards, but pride still chained them. They tried again. "Even if you are who you say you are, you still have no clearance here. Tell us why you've come." Elias looked past them again, his eyes misting with memory. "I have come," he said, "to bring my friend home. He gave his life for me, for all of us, and the sea still keeps what belongs to him. I intend to honor that debt." The crowd fell silent. Even the waves seemed to hush. The guards hesitated. This was no longer just about rules. It was about something deeper, something older than any regulation: loyalty, sacrifice, memory. But they were young and untested, afraid of losing control in front of so many witnesses. So, they hardened their faces again, though doubt trembled underneath. "You will not pass until higher authority clears it," the lead officer said firmly, and that was when the tide began to turn against them. The veterans in the crowd stepped closer, their voices no longer whispers. "This is Elias Ward," one said, voice strong. "He doesn't need your clearance. You should be saluting him, not blocking him." Others joined in, louder, the dock filled with shouts, arguments, stories of Ward's past deeds spilling into the air. Each tale struck the young guards like waves against a fragile wall. Elias stood quietly through it all, his presence alone commanding respect. He had no need to defend himself. His life already spoke louder than any argument. And still, he waited, calm as ever, while the storm of voices built around him, because he knew the truth always rises, just like the tide. The harbor air thickened with tension. The younger officers tried to mask their unease, but their stiff shoulders and nervous glances betrayed them. The crowd wasn't just watching anymore. It was choosing sides. And the longer Elias Ward stood, calmly on his weathered boat, the more the balance tipped away from the Coast Guard. One officer, clearly rattled, whispered to his partner, "Should we call the base commander?" His words weren't meant for the crowd, but the wind carried them far enough for others to hear. Murmurs rippled instantly if they needed higher authority. Then perhaps they already knew they were in the wrong. The lead officer clenched his fists, trying to salvage control. He stepped forward, voice sharp. "Captain Ward, I don't care what you once did or what stories these people believe. You are in violation of harbor security. You will turn your vessel around or face consequences." The crowd erupted in protest. Men and women shouted over each other, demanding the officer show respect. But Elias lifted his hand once more, his steady calm quieting them like the tide retreating from shore. His voice carried without force, deep and unwavering, faced storms that tore ships apart. "I have stood against enemies who outnumbered us 10-1. Do you think your threats trouble me, son? No. But they shame me, because once, when I wore your uniform, we were taught that honor came before pride." His words struck deeper than any shout. The officer's face turned red, his mouth opening but no reply coming. For a moment, silence reigned again, but pride is a dangerous master. Another young guard, desperate to prove himself, stepped onto the dock railing and prepared to board Ilias's vessel. "Enough of this," he spat. "If you won't move, we'll move you." Gasps rose from the crowd. A few veterans shouted warnings, while others clenched their fists in outrage. Elias did not flinch. His eyes followed the young man calmly. As he set his foot onto the deck, the old captain's voice was soft, almost sorrowful. "Careful, son, this deck has carried men braver than you through fires and storms. Step onto it with respect or not at all." The guard hesitated mid-step. Something in Ilias's tone made his leg tremble, and he retreated with embarrassment, muttering under his breath. Laughter broke out from the crowd, but Elias did not smile. He never humiliated, never mocked. He simply let the moment pass. Officers regrouped, their authority crumbling under the weight of a legend's presence, but instead of yielding, they grew harsher. "If you do not state your purpose, you will be arrested," the lead officer barked, though the threat lacked conviction. Elias's gaze softened, not for the officer, but for the sea stretching behind them. His voice lowered, carrying grief now instead of steel. "I told you why I came, to bring my friend home. He lies beneath these waters still, a man braver than I, whose sacrifice has been forgotten by time. I promised him, on the night he died, that I would return for him, and today, I intend to keep that promise." The words cut through the air. The crowd fell silent. Even the gulls circling overhead seemed to pause. There was something sacred in the way Elias spoke, an oath carried for decades, now ready to be fulfilled. The younger guards shifted uneasily. They had no regulation for this, no script to follow. To arrest him now would be to deny a man's final promise, but to allow him through without orders risked their careers. They stood trapped between duty and conscience. One officer, the youngest of the group, finally whispered, "Sir, if this is true, shouldn't we let him pass?" The lead officer glared at him, but doubt clouded his eyes too. We can't just take his word for it. Anyone can claim to be someone." But the crowd erupted again. Veterans shouted, sailors swore by the captain's deeds, older men recalled seeing him decorated in ceremonies long ago. Stories poured out faster than the guards could silence them, and with each voice, the name Elias Ward grew heavier, harder to deny. Still, the guards fought to hold their ground. "You don't understand," the leader insisted. "If we let him through without clearance, it will be our heads on the line. Orders are orders." Elias finally turned to him fully, his weathered face illuminated by the afternoon sun, his eyes sharp as steel yet heavy with memory, locked onto the young man's. "And what will you tell yourself when orders fade and you are left only with your conscience? That you followed the rule book while honor drowned before your eyes?" The officer's jaw tightened. He had no answer. The crowd pressed closer, voices rising, some angry, some pleading. A few veterans began shouting for the guards to show respect, while others demanded they call their superiors. The docks trembled with the sound of division. In the midst of the storm, Elias stood unshaken, but inside, his heart ached, not from the guards' disrespect, but from the memory of the friend he had come to honor. He could almost hear his laughter on the wind, see his hand gripping the railing beside him, feel the bond of brotherhood forged in fire and water. That was the weight he carried, not the arrogance of youth. The build-up of tension became unbearable. Every second stretched like rope pulled taut, ready to snap. The guards shouted orders. The crowd shouted back. and Elias remained still, a rock in the chaos, waiting for the moment when truth would finally break through. It was clear to everyone now something was about to give. A deep horn sounded in the distance. The crowd turned as a larger Coast Guard cutter approached, slicing through the harbor waters with authority. Its deck bristled with uniformed personnel, and atop the bridge stood a figure who clearly outranked everyone present. The younger guard stiffened immediately, relief and dread mixing on their faces. The cutter docked swiftly, and the high-ranking officer descended the gangway. His uniform was pristine, his presence commanding. He scanned the scene with a practiced eye, taking in the tension, the crowd, the silent old captain standing resolute on his weathered boat. "What in God's name is happening here?" he barked, voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. The younger guards snapped to attention, stammering explanations, but he raised a hand sharply, silencing them. Then his eyes fell on Elias Ward. Recognition hit instantly. The officer's expression shifted from confusion to shock to something deeper. He stepped forward slowly, almost reverently. "Captain Elias Ward," he said, voice lower now. "It's really you." Elias nodded once, calm and unassuming. "I, Admiral." The crowd fell completely silent. The name carried weight, but the title Admiral confirmed it. Even the most skeptical faces turned wide-eyed. The Admiral stepped closer, shaking his head in disbelief. "We thought you were lost at sea 40 years ago." "I was Elias," replied softly, "but I came back." For him, the Admiral swallowed hard, his eyes moistening. He turned to the young guards. "Do you have any idea who you've been trying to stop?" They stood frozen, shame creeping over them. The Admiral didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. This man is a legend, a hero of the old guard. There are entire sections of the Academy curriculum based on his missions. He saved dozens of lives during the southern storms of '84, held a sinking frigate together with his bare hands and willpower. Elias looked away, uncomfortable with the praise. The Admiral continued, voice trembling slightly now, "And his first officer, the one who died during that storm. We never found his body. I promised him I would," Elias said simply. "That's why I came. One last journey." The Admiral stepped onto Ilias's vessel, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Then you will have every escort and honor you deserve. I will see to it personally." The crowd erupted in applause and tears. Veterans saluted. Young sailors bowed their heads in shame. The younger guards lowered their weapons, some visibly trembling. Elias remained still, his eyes closed briefly, and a single tear traced down his weathered cheek. Not for himself, but for the friend who still waited beneath the waves. The Admiral addressed the crowd. "Let it be known, Captain Ward is not here to defy us. He is here to keep a promise. And any man who stands in his way, stands against everything we are sworn to uphold." The crowd cheered again, louder this time. The tension dissolved into reverence. People stepped forward to offer handshakes, salutes, whispered apologies, but Elias only nodded, never seeking the spotlight. As the sun began to dip, casting golden light across the harbor, the Admiral turned to him once more. "We'll leave at dawn. I'll have a full crew ready, and when we find him, we'll bring him home properly." Elias nodded, his voice almost a whisper now. "Thank you." For the first time in the entire day, he allowed himself to sit. The weight of years seemed to settle on his shoulders at last, not as a burden, but as release. His mission was almost done. The harbor quieted, the storm of tension now passed. But the image of the old captain, still strong, still faithful, remained etched in every heart present. He had not come to challenge authority. He had come to remind them all of what honor truly meant, and in doing so, he had given the entire harbor a glimpse of something rare, something eternal, a promise kept. The harbor was no longer a place of hostility. The shouting had stopped, the tension broken. Where there had been suspicion and arrogance, there was now only silence filled with respect. The young guards who had mocked and threatened Elias moments earlier now stood with their heads lowered, unable to meet his eyes. The Admiral, still standing at Ilias's side, turned to them. "You will remember this day," he said firmly, "not as a mistake, but as a lesson. Pride without understanding is dangerous. This man did more for the sea and for this country than any of you can yet imagine. If you forget that, you forget who you were sworn to be." The young men nodded stiffly, shame burning on their faces. Some stole quick glances at Elias, hoping for anger, but none came. The old captain simply looked at them the way a father looks, at stubborn Sunstone but not without compassion. "Do not carry this as disgrace," he said softly. "Carry it as memory. One day you will stand where I stand, facing the sea with more years behind you than ahead. When that day comes, remember what you said here, and remember what you chose to do. Then you will understand. The words settled over them like a weight. One young guard, the one who had almost boarded his vessel earlier, finally lifted his head. His lips trembled as he spoke. I'm sorry, sir. Elias gave the faintest of nods, and that was enough. The boy's shoulders loosened, and, though his shame remained, so did the beginning of respect. The crowd slowly dispersed, though many stayed nearby, unable to pull themselves fully away. They had witnessed something rare living history and they wanted to hold on to it as long as they could. A few of the older veterans approached quietly, saluting Elias in silence. Some shook his hand, others simply touched the rail of his boat as though it were sacred. Elias accepted it all with humility, though his eyes kept drifting back toward the horizon. Night fell, and lanterns lit the harbor in soft gold. The Admiral had made arrangements quickly. By dawn, a small flotilla would be ready to escort Elias to the waters where his friend had been lost. Crews prepared silently, the earlier mockery now replaced by reverence. Elias sat on his deck alone that night, the sound of the waves his only companion. His hand brushed the rail, the wood smooth from decades of salt and storms. He remembered every journey this vessel had taken, every soul it had carried, every storm it had survived. And he remembered the man who had once stood beside him, laughing in the face of danger, unyielding until the very end. "You'll come home tomorrow," Elias whispered to the sea. "I promised you, and I never break my word." The stars glittered above, reflected on the dark water like lanterns of the past. For Elias, there was peace in knowing the end of his journey was near. Not an end in failure or obscurity, but in the fulfillment of the one vow that had guided him through all these years of silence. By morning, the harbor would be different again. The young guards would carry a new respect in their eyes. The Admiral would lead with renewed conviction, and the people who had witnessed this day would pass the story on, keeping Elias Ward's name alive for another generation. But for Elias, none of that mattered. He did not come to be remembered. He came to remember. And in that quiet truth lay the heart of his legacy, not in medals, not in parades, but in promises kept when no one was watching. If this story moved you, if it made you pause for even a moment and think about sacrifice, respect, and the weight of promises kept, then I ask something simple of you. Do not let it end here. Do not let this just be another video you watch and scroll past, because Captain Elias Ward may be a story, but the values he carried, the courage, the honor, the humility are real. They belong to every man and woman who has ever stepped into uniform, taken an oath, and given more of themselves than the world will ever truly know. Too often we forget them. Too often we judge by appearances, dismissing the weathered faces, the quiet ones, the people who don't demand our respect but deserve it most. This channel exists so that their legacies are never forgotten. Every time you like, share, or comment, you're not just helping a video grow, you are amplifying a story that might change someone's heart. You're reminding others that respect is not earned only in the spotlight. Sometimes, it is carried quietly across decades, waiting for the day when truth is finally seen. So if you felt something here, let it move you to action. Subscribe, not for me, but for the countless untold stories of sacrifice and honor still waiting to be shared. Turn on the bell, because every week we bring another story like this, stories of the forgotten, the disrespected, the underestimated, who carried greatness inside them all along. And most of all, share this with someone you know, maybe a friend, maybe family, maybe even someone who needs the reminder that respect should never be withheld until it is too late. Let them see Elias Ward's journey, and let them feel what you just felt. One day, we will all look back on our lives, just as he did, and in that moment, it will not be the medals, the recognition, or the applause that matters. It will be the promises kept, the people remembered, the quiet dignity we carried when no one was watching. Honor that in others. Live that yourself. And never forget the ones who came before us, if you stand for that. If you believe respect and remembrance still matter, then stand with us here. Like, subscribe, share, and let's keep these stories alive, together.